At the same time, Hezbollah and its media have maintained strict radio silence. There could be various explanations for that. It could mean that the strike was indeed successful and that they won't be making any statement until they actually find his remains. It could mean that the strike was a failure and they're not making any statements to keep Israel off balance, perhaps to spirit him to safety. We just don't know. So I think there are two issues here. One concerns Hezbollah as a movement, and the other concerns the broader strategic picture. Regarding Hezbollah as a movement, it has suffered a series of assassinations over the past 2 weeks of some very senior commanders. And if its general secretary, who was an iconic, charismatic figure, was indeed assassinated today, and even more so along with other senior figures, it's tantamount to a decapitation strike, which will obviously, at least in the short term, severely undermine the movement and its ability to act and its organizational integrity, and it will throw it into chaos and so on. But having said that, I also would not jump to any conclusions about Hezbollah's future as a movement by losing these cadres and commanders. I mean, Nasrallah's two predecessors, Abbas Musawi and Raghat Harb, if I'm not mistaken, were also assassinated. And it's true that Nasrallah has been a particularly effective, iconic, charismatic figure within the movement. But Hezbollah also has what's called a very deep bench. It's a very deeply entrenched, very sophisticated organization, even though I should add that these latest assassinations do speak to complacency, to infiltration, and so on. So as far as Hezbollah is concerned, it would be a very severe blow. In terms of the wider strategic picture is concerned, it almost doesn't matter whether this attack was successful or not, because what Israel has now done, it has launched arguably the most intensive air raid in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict at a very densely populated suburb of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. And since then, it has given additional evacuation orders to hundreds of thousands of residents in the same neighborhood. And I think quite clearly, Israel is dead set on regional escalation. It sought to provoke a very widespread response by Hezbollah, which in turn will be used as a pretext to essentially flatten large parts of the Lebanese capital and perhaps other parts of Lebanon. And I think it's quite clearly trying to draw Iran directly into this conflict in the remaining months of the Biden administration. In my view, Israel sees a unique opportunity to engineer a direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran, and it has determined that the road to Tehran leads through the southern suburbs of Beirut.
Yeah, there was an Israeli official who was quoted, I think today, saying in response to the 21-day ceasefire that the United States had proposed, we can't stop now. We've been waiting years for this, which goes to your point. And I wanted to pick up on something that you alluded to there about the Dahiya doctrine. Can you talk a little bit about what that doctrine is, and with the irony that it appears to be that they're about to apply it to this area that it is named after? It seems like this strike that we're talking about now may be just the beginning of a massive assault that's coming.
Yeah, well, the Dahiya doctrine, so named by former senior Israeli military officer Gadi Eisenkot, who was also a member of Israel's war cabinet after October 7th, until he resigned a few months ago. The Dahiya doctrine is an Israeli military doctrine whereby Israel, in its armed confrontations with its enemies, deliberately and disproportionately targets civilians and civilian infrastructure with the aim of creating pressure on its military adversaries from their constituencies. This Eisenkot first enunciated this in 2008, but it in fact goes back decades. I mean, if you think about the late 1960s, when various PLO guerrilla movements were ensconced in Jordan, in the Jordan Valley, Israel essentially depopulated the Jordan Valley and destroyed irrigation works in the Jordan Valley, southern Lebanon, from the late 1960s onwards. Israel has always, in fact, had this approach that when faced with a military adversary, you not only seek to attack that adversary directly and seek to defeat it militarily, but at the same time, you try to extract an intolerable price from its civilian support base, from its constituency, and from the infrastructure of the territory or state concerned in order to generate political pressure upon that military adversary. And that's essentially what we've been seeing in the Gaza Strip for the past year and what we're now increasingly seeing in Lebanon.
You also mentioned the infiltration that Hezbollah has suffered at the hands of Israeli intelligence. And I've seen some speculation that Syria may be the weak link here in the chain, in the axis between Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, and Hamas. Famously, of course, Hezbollah and Hamas split for a while over Hezbollah's support for Syria's dictator, Bashar al-Assad, who I would argue has no ideology whatsoever. His goal is to remain in power, and he's going to side with whoever he can to remain in power. And so he would be, it seems to me, the most susceptible, or entities within, factions within his operation might be the most susceptible to Israeli infiltration if he believes that that's his path forward. What is your sense of why Hamas has been able to resist that type of intelligence infiltration?
You mean Hezbollah?
Hamas, I think Hamas has been able to resist it, but Hezbollah has not.
Yeah.
I'm curious why you think that is.
Well, there's several issues here. First of all, regarding Hezbollah and Lebanon, it remains unclear whether Israel's ability to target Hezbollah cadres and commanders is a result of signals intelligence or human intelligence, in other words, actual penetration of spies and collaborators, or perhaps a combination of the two. Regarding the Syrian government, I don't think the Syrian government as such would be playing a role in this, for the simple reason that it sees both Iran and Hezbollah as bulwarks that it believes are necessary for its defense and survival. So it's very unlikely that the Syrian government would be shooting itself in the foot this way. But I think what you can say is that, Syria has been at war for over a decade, has witnessed a profound economic collapse. The same can be said about Lebanon, obviously, in recent years. And Hezbollah does have enemies in both Syria and Lebanon and elsewhere. And under such circumstances, it's entirely plausible that Israel and or the United States, particularly with the U.S. now maintaining also a direct military presence in Syria, would have been able to identify and recruit a number of agents and collaborators. So I certainly wouldn't exclude that. But again, we don't really know to what extent this is Israel, I presume, with the support of the United States, Great Britain, Germany, and perhaps others, being able to successfully tap into Hezbollah's communication networks, and to what extent it is a result of individuals penetrating the organization. I think Hamas is a somewhat different kettle of fish. The reason being that since Hamas seized power in the Gaza Strip in 2007, there has been increasingly restricted passage of individuals into and out of the Gaza Strip, primarily because of Israel's blockade. And this has really reduced the opportunities for Israel to recruit Palestinian collaborators. Secondly,